Hello and welcome to the summer box set edition of Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that looks ahead in British politics and attempts to tell you what might be coming next. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Today we go deep into the world of education, once the top priority for Labour governments. But is it now? Are schools the priority, or is early years the first call for money? We find out in this look ahead to the autumn term in education policy.
Now, in the canon of Labour phrase-making, Tony Blair's education still lingers in the collective mind decades after he made that pledge when he was campaigning for office. But it's a mission that feels like Labour needs to redefine for itself in a new era, and a schools white paper coming up is intended to firm up what this Starmer government has in store in schools and education more broadly and put down a marker as to what kind of system we might really need in the era of AI, digital advances, and setbacks in the classroom, and a fast changing job market afterwards.
And who better to get us back to school for the new term, now we've put the buckets and spades back in the cupboard, than Laura McInerney, a former teacher and editor of Schools Week, who spent 12 years at the chalk face, or whiteboard these days, and is now co-founder of Teacher Tapp, which surveys 10,000 teachers for insights in how they are seeing the education system. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
So, Laura, I'm going to pick up there and ask you about the schools bill, which is obviously the big education subject when we all come back to school at Westminster. Seems to me to be trying to tackle quite a wide range of subjects. It's been described as a reset, a word I never quite know what it means when politicians use it, but they're quite fond of it. But it says it's going to reset the system, partly to ensure more opportunity for more children to be school ready by the age of 5. Then it has special education needs and disabilities, the SEND programme, which it has promised to overhaul. It has recruitment and retention crisis, I think we could agree, in teaching, but it also has a pledge to deliver over 6,000 new teachers, one of those pre-election promises, which looks a bit tricky. And it's got Ofsted reform, the regulator on the books. Now, to me, this looks like a lot of parts, like a dim sum schools bill. But do you think it's a good one?
So we've got the schools bill that's been going through has got some parts of that, and we're actually going to have a white paper as well on the table. So doing different bits of this are doing different things. In terms of the wellbeing and schools bill that's in at the moment, that really is a mixed bag. It's got some things on admissions, it's got some stuff on teacher pay, as you say, about recruitment and retention, and it will probably go through, but no one is going to see massive changes unless they're in a school. So, for example, academies, which the majority of secondary schools are and about half of primary schools are, they don't have to stick to particular pay regulations for teachers. They don't have to teach the national curriculum. If the bill goes through, then they will have to be stricter on pay. They will have to follow the national curriculum. And that might be a bit of a pressure point. In the Lords, certainly we're seeing those Lords involved in the academies who really like the freedom saying, we don't want that to go through. But they're not likely to get that many changes. So that's on the way. What, as you mentioned, is going to be even bigger come the autumn is they have to put a white paper on the table that they've promised, because all of those other missions around special educational needs, in particular around early years, they've got to do more on. And so there's going to have to be more plans that will come through in the autumn. And as it stands, no one can really work out what they're going to do because there's no money, there's no will after everything that happened over the PIP assessments and the welfare changes. And so they've promised something, but what will arrive, we don't know.
I was talking to various people in government over the last few days, and they are very, very cautious about pre-announcing or pre-briefing exactly what's coming up. They're absolutely at pains to stress that the white paper coming up in the autumn isn't just about reform of special educational needs, but it's also, in their words, how we better incorporate some of the good and enjoyable stuff that makes school work. Boosting sport, boosting music. The question is exactly what do they mean by that, and exactly how they're going to do that, and what the balance of the white paper is, which may just end up being dominated by that one issue that is deeply, deeply worrying lots and lots of Labour MPs. Laura, from your point of view, if SEND is going to be the trickiest education issue over the autumn, does the system work or is it broken? What would be a sensible reform from your point of view? And what are the pitfalls that the government could fall into in this?
There are major problems in that about 10 years ago, the law changed. So in 2014, we had the new Children and Family Schools Act, and that changed it so that when children get something that's called an education, health, and care plan, it's hard to get. But once that's written down, you have a document that basically, as a parent, you can go and legally enforce your rights. And it also put a responsibility on the local authority to fund it, to secure the resource to get that. And what's happened is because more and more of these documents are being sought, more and more are being won, often hard and through the courts, but they do get won in the end. The high needs costs has gone up by about £4 billion and is projected to continue to go up. And so the government is trying to work out how it handles that, because it means almost all of the extra money that's come into education in the last 10 years has gone into these high needs budgets. The cost is beyond what the state seems to be able to provide. And secondly, it's just a very, very long ride to get one. If you have to go through several court cases, then there are some people who will be able and prepared to do that. There will be some people who won't. And you end up with quite an unequal system. So in my view, the sensible thing for them to do would be to try and address some of the inequality, to point out these problems. But they've not done that. What's hard is there are problems, but there's not much awareness of it. And if what you come out with just takes a bunch of rights and costs away, you're not going to have, I think, a very palatable policy.
I don't think yet this government has conclusively started to tell a story about what it wants to do with schools that the public, or even I, frankly, understand. For many years, the dominant conversation was about how do you reform the sector? How do you introduce initially academies under Labour and then free schools under the coalition government that gave individual schools more power to innovate? You had programs like Teach First, which basically helped teachers from non-traditional backgrounds get into the sector. And now this government has come in, and the language about schools is about better standards for result and better results for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, and to give those kids more of a sense of belonging. But the type of policy that this government is pursuing in order to achieve that aim feels like it's sort of going away from what had been the consensus in education policy over 20, 30 years. To what extent has there been a handbrake turn in the methods and the goal of schools policy under this government? How much of that has been a surprise?
I think you're right that there isn't been a clear story on this, and also that one of the successes of the governments for the previous 15 years was the fact that they had a coherent view on schools. Whether you agreed with it or not, it stuck together and they delivered on it. Right. And actually, schools, by the time we got to the election last year, was probably one of the better parts of the system. So people in schools were sort of waiting around, hoping that Labour were going to come up and make things better, but they weren't really sure what they were going to do. And then when they have arrived, it has mainly felt like we'll just be a bit nicer, we'll be more positive, but it's not come with any changes on the ground. And that's why the next 12 months will be interesting, because the white paper, not only will it be about special educational needs, but there is a sense it might be something about structures. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something about regional mayors or devolution, or something about powers going back to not necessarily local authorities, but local people. You've got Andy Burnham up in Manchester, the mayor there, who has been absolutely bridling to take over the curriculum. He's come up with this Manchester Baccalaureate, and you do have a curriculum review coming out in September. So Becky Francis for the last year has been looking at the curriculum, and Labour will have a chance to put out what the subjects are that they want kids to learn. And I suspect we will see some steps away from the academy system. Watch out. I'm not sure if it will be mayoral or regional, but it just wouldn't shock me if Andy gets his way.
So I think you brought us very neatly, Laura, to what I would just call the big Bridget Phillipson question. What is it that she wants? And to what extent is it about overturning previous Tory policies? The government is saying struggling schools may convert to academy status, but that would imply they don't have to, or more slowly. That's a very different approach to the Conservatives and indeed even to the Blair government, which saw academies as getting us away from, you'll remember the infamous phrase of Alistair Campbell, the bog standard comp that was underperforming and didn't have a clear ethos or a clear goal for improvement. Do you believe that that is now a settled matter, or is it still up for for grabs?
The thing with Bridget Phillipson is I think she definitely believes in an equality, a fairness. She worries about disadvantage. She is comprehensively educated up in the Northeast, which until relatively recently was rare. So I think she feels positively about comprehensive. She doesn't want to go in and shake them up as people have in the past. She wants this sense of we're all in it together. It's opportunities for everyone moving together in a coherent and fair way. That is different to the academy system, which was about let 1,000 flowers bloom, let the best people get out of the gate and let them run far and free. And if you fall behind, then we'll sort of take you out and throw you into one of these academies. So I think that's where tonally it's different. The question just comes back to, but what does that mean for a policy? Well, the policies that they've put on the table are you will have to do the national curriculum. You will have stricter rules on your admissions. You will have stricter rules on your teacher pay. And that does feel to the Conservatives in particular like a backward step. But for Labour, it feels like they're caring about everybody in lockstep.
Well, it's a big difference of argument. I just want to squeeze you on that point. As it happens on this podcast, you also have someone from a comprehensive school in the Northeast. So I feel I can go toe to toe with Bridget Phillipson just a little bit on this topic. One of the reasons the whole thing came into being, and I covered the Academies programme when it was being set up, but both under Blair and under Cameron, so across the two parties, was a recognition that too many local authorities had failed schools. If Labour just wants to go back there, and I'm not saying this is what will happen in the autumn, that could become quite contentious.
I don't know if it would be contentious in the Labour Party, though. I don't know if the Labour Party have ever really loved the academy system. There is a difference, though, between the academy system of that late 2000s, early 2010s, which was, as you say, Anne, this was grassroots. It was about parents starting up their own schools and having their own freedoms. 15 years on, what you've actually got are quite large organisations that now run 20, 30, 80 schools all across the country. And for the parents of those schools, if they go in and they don't like the curriculum or they have an issue with their child's behaviour, they can't go to the local counsellor. And what you're seeing instead is everybody going to the National Schools Inspectorate, turning up at the DFE, asking a million different questions. And I think in part there is something about wanting to just maybe have something in between your local school and Bridget Phillipson being in charge of that school and bringing something back that's regional. But I have the same concerns as you as well.
What I'm interested in your view, I understand the politics of it. To what extent is their diagnosis of the problem correct? To what extent did the system that the Tories handed over to the Labour Party at this election basically cater for the middle classes and university kids? And to what extent is there an urgent repair job to be done for the rest? And that's why they're having to patch things up with academies. Is the problem Bridget Phillipson identifies the right one?
When we surveyed recently around actually special educational needs and what people wanted to see on this, we did an open-ended question to get thousands and thousands of responses back. And when you read over them, there is definitely a concern both on that and around the curriculum that there was an over correction in favour of children who liked academics, and that there wasn't the wiggle room anymore to have some students who maybe were finding work challenging, didn't enjoy it, who wanted a different type of curriculum, that was unacceptable. Actually, I think the Labour Party and the Conservative Party internally both struggle with it. You've always had a section of the Conservative Party that's saying we should have more kids going and doing apprenticeships, and actually the Conservatives did loads on apprenticeships. What's funny is Labour are saying that the Conservatives focused on academics, but I'm actually not hearing a vocational policy from Labour. What is their plan? They're not saying that actually more students are going to go and do vocational qualifications or they're going to change it. They're pushing the T levels, which are these new 16 to 19 qualifications. But again, those were a Conservative policy. So they find themselves in a strange world on this one, and it's not clear how they get out of it.
One of the striking things from the spending review was, despite Rachel Reeves' decision to try and publicise her interest and her love for education and what schools did for her, the schools budget actually only rose by 0.4% a year, which feels very, very tight. In simple funding terms, do you think that education isn't and schools isn't the priority that you would have expected from this government? As we get through the parliament, how does this shake down? Where will a lack of money sort of come out in the system? Is it going to cause a lot of problems with staffing?
So I think most people would say that Up until this point, schools' budgets were protected for a long time. Then they got squeezed, but they were just about manageable. This year, it does seem really problematic, and we are seeing secondary schools starting to shed staff. That wouldn't be so problematic if everything else wasn't broken. And what school leaders are constantly saying is, look, I can even deal with tight budgets for what we've got to do, but I can't do that if I have to give housing advice, if we're dealing with kids' dentistry work, if I'm also sorting out 30% of my time on special educational needs tribunals, if I'm also trying to work out, all of the other issues because there's no social workers available. They can't do it all and other people's jobs. And that's the biggest challenge. So I think there is a bit of a reckoning coming. And we've got an increasingly aggressive, I would say, set of union leaders. So Matt Rack, who was at the Fire Brigade Union, has just been hired to be of the two big teachers' unions. He's now one of the leaders. Daniel Kebede, over the last couple of years, has been definitely agitating for more strikes.
Do you think that there are going to be teacher strikes in this parliament?
I hope not, and it's rare when they do happen. But Bridget Phillipson has made a very interesting move in the last couple of weeks. She has asked the independent pay review body to give them advice for a 3-year settlement, and this hasn't happened before. And she's also asked for their advice on a range of different changes to paying conditions, which have never been asked for around sort of how the working hours work. And I think they're getting themselves ready to have the information so that if there is any kind of agitation, they've got places where they can go for negotiations.
So you're saying that preemptively, the Education Secretary is already looking to what might be the landing zone for potential industrial action, which I'm going to be a bit provocative here, is led by at least by the two unions that you've mentioned, by quite hard left union leaders. Wouldn't that look like a bit of a cave-in for the government?
I don't think she would characterise it that way.
I'm sure she wouldn't, but other people might.
Yeah, you could look at it that way. The other way to look at it is there's a certain envelope of funding that's now been decided for the next few years. It's sensible to give schools a 3-year trajectory so they can plan their budget so that there's a bit of certainty. But I would be in the back of my head if I was her thinking, well, I can see that you've got leaders who are much more experienced long-term trade unionists who are taking those positions. And if I do find myself in a fight with them, I need to have places to go.
I understand what you're thinking about this. Do we think that Bridget Phillipson is going to remain Secretary of State for Education? She must be very frustrating for her. Well, Sam hears some things, I hear other things. There's a sense of, is she, has she kind of had some fallings out with number 10? Is she nailed onto this job foreseeably?
I mean, when people message me, they'll sometimes say she's a goner and then she'll be there a few weeks later and seems to be coming through. What I will say is, historically, anyone who's been the shadow education secretary for a period of time, they usually survive quite a long time, even if everybody is shouting at them. And a year in the office is a very short amount of time. If they were going to start moving her around, I think they would have to give her something else high up. So unless they've just got reasons to believe she'd do better in a higher position, something like foreign secretary, I can't see her moving.
So I would agree with Laura. We did some polling just before we recorded this podcast, and Bridget Phillipson is actually the second most popular, or given that they're all in negative territory, the second least unpopular member of the cabinet. And there was a bit of a squall around her and her position, and there was a bit of briefing around number 10 being surprised at what they claimed were some elements of what was going on in the Department for Education. But I think that was stamped on pretty hard. And I think that Bridget Phillipson herself got personal guarantees now from Keir Starmer that she will stay in her job. So if I had to bet, I don't think her job's on the line. I think she is going to be there for the medium haul. I think Keir Starmer has a much bigger problem and question about when he does his next reshuffle, what it looks like and what is in play. But I don't think Bridget Phillipson is up for the chop anytime soon.
Confident back to school prediction there.
I think school's out for the day. Laura, it just remains for us to say thank you very much indeed for joining us and for your insight and clarity in what's happening in the sector. Very much appreciated for all of us heading back to term.
Shiny shoes, Laura. Shiny shoes.
Thank you.